spent a lot of time in the shadow of Mount Rainier. To the tourists, it's a postcard, a snow-capped giant watching over Washington. But to those of us in search and rescue, Rainier is a vertical labyrinth. It's a place where the map stops matching the ground, and sometimes the ground starts building things that shouldn't exist. This story belongs to Elena. Elena was a professional, solo female traveler with a following of 500,000. She was smart, she was geared up, and she was careful. She wasn't some influencer chasing a sunset in flip-flops. She was a woman who knew how to use a satellite phone and an ice axe. She was hiking the Paradise Trail in late March, filming a vlog titled, "Why the Woods Aren't Scary If You're Prepared." The irony isn't lost on any of us. About 4 miles in, the fog started to do that thing it does on the mountain, thickening until the world is just you and a 10-foot circle of gray. Elena stopped to adjust the strap on her pack. She panned her camera 360 degrees, narrating how to stay calm when visibility drops. That's when she saw it through her viewfinder, a ranger station. It was sitting just 50 yards off the main path, small, rustic, with that classic dark-stained cedar siding and a green shingled roof. Elena was confused. She'd hiked this trail a dozen times. There was no station here. She checked her Garmin GPS. The screen was just a jumble of static and a single blinking red dot that said, "Home." "Maybe it's a new emergency shelter," she tells the camera, her voice tight but curious. She walks toward it. As she gets closer, the Reddit brain kicks in, that instinct that tells you when a scene is too quiet. There are no bird sounds, no wind, just the sound of her own boots on the frozen mud. She reaches the building and stops. The cedar siding isn't wood. Up close, Elena realizes the entire building is a solid, seamless block of cold industrial concrete. The wood grain has been painted on with terrifying precision, but there are no seams, no nails. And worst of all, there are no doors, no windows, just a flat gray surface where a door should be. Then she hears it. Coming from inside the solid concrete wall, she hears a voice. It's her own voice. It's the intro to the vlog she just filmed 10 minutes ago. "Hey guys, it's Elena. Today we're talking about why the woods aren't scary." But the voice is wrong. It's stretched out, the vowels dragging like iron on stone. Every few seconds, the audio glitches, replaced by a sound like a heavy wet bag being dropped on a floor. Thud, thud. Elena backs away, but her camera stays fixed on the wall. A small black slot, like a mail slot, opens in the concrete. Not a mechanical opening, but the material itself just parting. A piece of paper slides out. Elena grabbed that paper and ran. She didn't stop until she hit the parking lot and found a real ranger. When we found her GoPro later that night, the footage didn't show the station. It just showed Elena standing in a perfectly empty clearing, talking to a massive, jagged rock that looked like it had been melted. But the paper she held in her hand, it was real. I saw it. It was a high-resolution printout of a YouTube comment section. Thousands of comments, all dated 3 years in the future, all saying the same thing. Does anyone know if they ever found Elena's body? Mount Rainier is still there, but Elena doesn't hike anymore. She told me she can still hear herself talking through the walls of her own apartment, waiting for the ranger to let her back in. In the world of search and rescue, we have a saying, "The mountain doesn't have a face until it steals yours." Most people think of Yosemite as a cathedral of granite, El Capitan, Half Dome, the majestic waterfalls. But for those of us who work the SAR shifts, Yosemite is a hall of mirrors. It's a place where the scale is so massive that your brain starts to look for patterns just to stay sane. And sometimes the mountain provides a pattern you weren't ready to see. This story involves 2 sisters, Chloe and Zoe. They were part of that growing subculture of extreme minimalist climbers you see discussed on Reddit, the ones who believe that safety gear is a mental crutch. They were in their early 20s, fit, sun-bleached, and possessed by that dangerous combination of high skill and zero fear. They were bouldering near the base of El Capitan, moving away from the crowds to find a specific, unnamed problem they'd heard about in a private Discord server. It was one of those perfect California afternoons where the air feels like silk and the granite is warm under your chalked fingers. Chloe was the lead, about 40 feet up a sheer vertical face. There were no ropes, no harnesses, just the friction of her shoes and the strength in her tendons. Zoe was on the ground, acting as a spotter, her neck craned back, watching her sister navigate a particularly nasty crimp. Chloe reached a small, narrow ledge, just wide enough to stand on if you pressed your chest against the stone. She took a deep breath, the smell of sun-warmed rock filling her lungs. She looked down to check on Zoe. Zoe was there. She was standing about 50 feet below, her hands shielded over her eyes. Looking up, she waved. "You've got the reach, Chloe. Just stay high." Chloe nodded, feeling that surge of adrenaline that climbers live for. But as she turned her head to look at the next hold to her left, she froze. Standing on the same narrow ledge not 3 feet away from her was Zoe. Chloe told me her first thought wasn't horror. It was confusion. Her brain physically refused to process what she was seeing. It tried to glitch the image away. This Zoe, the one on the ledge, was wearing the exact same turquoise tank top, the same black leggings, the same chalk bag. Even the smudge of dirt on her left cheek was identical, but Zoe was on the ground. She'd just seen her. "Zoe?" Chloe whispered, her fingers starting to cramp from the sudden tension. The Zoe on the ledge didn't look at her. She was staring straight ahead at the granite, her nose almost touching the stone. She was perfectly still, unnaturally still. Her chest wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. "Zoe, answer me," Chloe's voice cracked. Slowly, the figure on the ledge turned its head. It didn't turn like a human. It was a smooth mechanical rotation, like a camera on a gimbal. When it looked at Chloe, the eyes were wrong. They weren't brown like her sisters. They were the exact color and texture of the granite behind them, a flat, speckled gray, devoid of pupils or irises. Then the thing opened its mouth. It didn't speak. It emitted a sound that Chloe described as the sound of a mountain breaking, a deep, tectonic grinding of rock against rock. And then, through that grinding, came a melody, a soft, distorted humming of the lullaby their mother used to sing to them when they were 5 years old. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Below, on the ground, the real Zoe started screaming. "Chloe, get down. What is that? What is that standing next to you?" The fake Zoe didn't react to the scream. Instead, it reached out a hand. Chloe noticed the fingernails. They were perfectly clean. No chalk, no broken cuticles. They looked like they had been polished in a salon 5 minutes ago. The hand moved toward Chloe's face, the fingers elongated and cold. Chloe did the only thing she could do. She let go. It was a 40-foot drop. In any other situation, it would have been a death sentence. But as she fell, Chloe said it felt like the air itself thickened to catch her. She hit the dirt hard, shattering her ankle and cracking 3 ribs, but she was alive. Zoe ran to her, sobbing, dragging her away from the base of the cliff. They both looked up. The figure was still on the ledge, but it wasn't standing anymore. It was moving. It began to walk, not up, not down, but sideways. It walked horizontally across the vertical granite face as if gravity had simply ceased to exist for it. It moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, its body perpendicular to the cliff, walking toward the shadows of the great roof. As it walked, it continued to hum. The sound echoed off the stone walls of the valley, amplified, until it felt like the entire park was singing that lullaby. When our SAR team arrived, we found the sisters huddled together a mile from the base. Zoe was catatonic, and Chloe was delirious with pain. Chloe kept pointing at my uniform, asking if I was the real one or the stone one. We searched that section of the cliff the next morning. There was no one there, no rogue climbers, no hidden ledges. But we did find something. High up on that sheer face, 40 feet above the ground, there were 2 sets of handprints etched into the granite. Not chalk marks, etched deep into the stone. One set was rough, frantic, the marks of a human struggling for a grip. The second set, right next to it, was perfect. Every fingerprint, every line of the palm was carved into the rock with laser-like precision. And the stone inside those prints was polished to a mirror shine, as if someone had spent 100 years buffing the granite until it turned to glass. The sisters moved to the Midwest. They don't go near mountains anymore. They don't even like tall buildings. Chloe told me that the worst part isn't the memory of the fake Zoe. It's the fact that sometimes, when she looks in the mirror, she sees her own reflection start to hum. And she can't remember if she's the sister who fell or the sister who stayed on the ledge. On Reddit, they call it a glitch in the matrix. They talk about skin crawlers and mimics, but we know the truth. The mountain doesn't just watch you, it records you. and every once in a while it decides to play the recording back, just to see if you can tell the difference. If you spend any time on r/2x chromosomes or r/let's hug not meet, you'll notice a recurring theme: the fear of the persistent stranger. The man who doesn't take no for an answer, who follows you just a little too long on the street, or who masks his obsession as politeness. In the city, you can duck into a coffee shop. In the deep woods of Virginia, there is nowhere to hide but the earth itself. And sometimes the earth is in on the hunt. This story comes from Dr. Eris. Eris was a field biologist, a woman who spent more time with rare mosses and fungal colonies than with people. She was working near a geological anomaly called the Devil's Bathtub in the Jefferson National Forest. It's a place of stunning turquoise waters and ancient jagged rock formations that look like teeth rising from the loam. It was a humid Thursday in July. The air was thick with the hum of cicadas, a sound that usually feels like a heartbeat. But that day, it sounded like a warning. Eris was off trail, documenting a rare species of bioluminescent lichen in a narrow, rocky gorge. As she worked, she heard a sound that didn't belong in the wilderness. It wasn't a scream. It was a rhythmic, wet sliding noise, followed by a heavy, hitching breath. Shh-tuck, shh-tuck. She followed the sound to a limestone cliff face where a narrow fissure, a crevice, split the rock. It was barely 4 inches wide at the entrance, a dark vertical slit that seemed to swallow the light. And trapped inside that 4-inch gap was a woman. Eris told me her brain short-circuited. The woman was wedged sideways, her face pressed against the cold stone, her eyes wide and bloodshot. It was physically impossible for a human being to be in there. To fit into a 4-inch gap, her ribcage would have had to be crushed, her pelvis shattered, but she looked folded. Like she had been turned into a 2-dimensional version of herself. "Help me," the woman wheezed. Her voice didn't come from her throat. It vibrated out of the rock itself. "Please, he's coming back. He says we aren't finished with the first date." Eris dropped her gear, her hands shaking. Who put you in there? I need to call for a rescue team. I can't pull you out. The gap is too small." "The gentleman," the woman sobbed. "I met him near the trailhead. He was wearing a tuxedo, a black velvet tuxedo in 90-degree heat. He offered me a bottle of water. I said no, thank you. I told him I wanted to hike alone." Eris felt a cold spike of dread. "And then what?" "He didn't get angry," the woman whispered. "That was the scary part. He just smiled. He told me I was playing hard to get. He followed me for 6 miles. Every time I turned around, he was 10 feet closer. He didn't run. He just glided. He kept telling me how nice he was being, how most guys wouldn't have walked this far just to make sure I was safe." The woman let out a wet, clicking sound from her chest. "When I tried to run, he caught me. He didn't hit me. He just touched the rock and told it to make room for his lady. The stone opened up like water. He pushed me in. He said he'd leave me here until I learned how to be polite to a nice guy." Eris grabbed a crowbar from her field kit, desperate to wedge it into the limestone. As she leaned in, the temperature in the gorge dropped 40 degrees. The cicadas went silent. From the deep, pitch-black shadows at the back of the crevice, where no light should reach, a voice spoke. It was a smooth, cultured voice, the kind of voice that sounds like expensive whiskey and old leather. It was the voice of every nice guy who ever felt entitled to a woman's time. "She's being very ungrateful, don't you think, Doctor?" Eris spun around, but the gorge was empty. The voice was coming from the stone itself. "I walked 6 miles for her." I offered her refreshment. I gave her my undivided attention. And all she did was look at her watch. All she did was talk about boundaries. In my day, we called that rudeness. The limestone began to groan. Eris watched in horror as the 4-inch gap began to narrow. It was closing. The rock was knitting itself back together like a healing wound. "Stop it!" Eris screamed, hammering at the rock with her crowbar. "You're killing her." "I'm protecting her," the voice purred. "Out here, she's safe from bad men. Here she belongs to the mountain. She belongs to the gentleman. She'll stay in the rock until she remembers her manners." The woman inside the crevice let out one final muffled shriek as the stone pressed against her lips. Her eyes rolled back, and then snap. The sound of 1,000 dry twigs breaking at once. The gap sealed shut. Eris fell back, gasping. The cliff face was smooth. There was no fissure, No crack, just solid, ancient limestone. She ran. She didn't stop until she found a SAR outpost. We went back with ground-penetrating radar and heavy drilling equipment. We spent 3 days scanning that cliff. The radar showed something that still keeps me awake at night. Deep inside the solid rock, 3 feet past the surface, there was a void, a hollow space in the shape of a human woman. But it wasn't just one. As we moved the radar further down the cliff, we found dozens of them, all perfectly preserved in the limestone, like insects in amber. Some were holding water bottles that turned out to be solid cylinders of rusted iron. Eris never went back to the field. She works in a lab now, in a building with no windows and white plastered walls. She told me that sometimes, when she's working late, she hears a polite rapping sound coming from the inside of her desk. Knock, knock, knock. And then a whisper through the wood. Are you going to be rude too, Eris? Or are you going to let me in? On Reddit, they talk about the man in the woods, or stalker entities. But in the Jefferson National Forest, we know him as the gentleman. He's the physical manifestation of every toxic, nice thought ever whispered into the dark. He doesn't want your money. He doesn't even want your life. He just wants you to sit still and listen to him. Forever. And the mountain? The mountain is his parlor. It's always making room for one more unpolite guest. If you browse r/unresolved mysteries, or the deeper threads of r/high strangeness, you'll find a recurring obsession with old money cults, the idea that the founding families of the Appalachian frontier didn't just build homesteads, they built gateways. They talk about bloodline debts and secret societies that operate in the gaps between the mountains. In the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, the fog isn't just weather, it's a shroud. And sometimes what it hides is the bill coming due for a century of silence. This story comes from Jade. Jade was a van lifer, a solo traveler who had spent 3 years documenting her journey through the national parks. She was a modern nomad, her life distilled into a high-roof transit van and a high-end camera. She was looking for a specific, off-the-map valley near Cades Cove, a place her grandmother had mentioned in a series of cryptic letters before she passed away from dementia. Her grandmother's last words hadn't been about family or love. They had been, "Don't let the iron get cold, Jade. They're still waiting for their seat at the table." It was a Tuesday in late October. The Smokies were living up to their name. A thick, blue-gray haze had settled into the hollows, making the world feel like an underwater graveyard. Jade was miles past the last marked trail, navigating by a hand-drawn map she'd found in her grandmother's attic. She rounded a bend in a narrow, laurel-choked valley and stopped. There, in a clearing where the trees grew in a perfect, unnatural circle, stood a staircase. It wasn't a wooden porch or a modern construction. It was a Victorian-style cast-iron spiral staircase. It was beautiful, intricate, and absolutely terrifying. The black iron was covered in delicate carvings of ivy and weeping willows, looking as fresh as the day it was forged. It stood 12 feet tall, spiraling up into the mist and ending in a small circular iron platform that led to nowhere. Jade felt a physical pull, a call, that she described as an intrusive thought whispered in her own voice. Just see what's at the top. It's your inheritance. It's yours. She walked toward it. As her hand touched the iron banister, she let out a gasp. The iron wasn't cold. It was hot. Not enough to burn her skin instantly, but enough to make her pulse thrum against the metal. It felt like the iron was a heating element for something much larger buried beneath the earth. Jade began to climb. Clink, clink, clink. Her boots echoed off the iron steps, but the sound didn't travel into the forest. It stayed within the circle of trees, bouncing back at her like a heartbeat. She reached the top platform, 10 feet above the forest floor. She looked down, expecting to see her camera gear and the mossy ground. But the forest was gone. Instead, the clearing below was transformed. It was night, but the valley was lit by hundreds of flickering beeswax candles. A massive mahogany dining table stretched across the grass, set with fine china and silver that looked like it had been polished with blood. Seated at the table were 20 figures. They were dressed in the high-fashion attire of the 1920s. Tuxedos, silk gowns, pearls, but they weren't wearing human faces. Every single person at the table was wearing a mask made of raw, wet deerskin. The fur was still attached, the eye holes cut jaggedly, showing only a void of darkness behind them. They were eating in total silence. There was no clinking of silverware, no laughter, just the rhythmic, synchronized movement of 20 masked heads leaning over their plates. Then the figure at the head of the table stood up. She was wearing a gown of black lace, and around her neck was a necklace Jade recognized instantly. It was the emerald pendant her grandmother had been buried in. The woman reached up and slowly peeled back the deerskin mask. It was Jade's grandmother. But she wasn't 80. She was 30. Her skin was glowing, her eyes sharp and predatory. She looked up at Jade on the platform and smiled, a wide, hungry smile that had too many teeth. "You're late, Jade," her grandmother's voice boomed, echoing with the weight of a century. "The iron has been hot for 3 generations. Your seat has been empty since the day you were born. Come down. Take your place at the head of the family." Jade felt her feet move toward the edge of the platform. The call was no longer a whisper. It was a command. She saw the empty chair at the end of the table. On the plate sat a single iron coin, glowing red hot. "Just walk down the stairs, Jade," the grandmother urged. "Accept the debt. Accept the longevity. We have so much to show you about the roots of these mountains." The other 19 guests stopped eating. In unison, they turned their masked heads toward Jade. They didn't speak, but Jade heard a collective thought inside her brain. "Take the seat. Take the seat. Take the seat." Jade looked at the iron banister. The skin on her palms was starting to smoke. The heat was becoming unbearable. She realized then that the stairs weren't a way up. They were a way in. If she walked down those stairs into that clearing, she wouldn't be going back to her van. She would be stepping into a timeline that had been waiting for her since before the park was even founded. "No," Jade whispered. "Don't be a difficult child, Jade." The grandmother's voice sharpened. "The family is the only thing that lasts. Everything else is just smoke." Jade didn't walk down. She didn't stay on the platform. She did the only thing that felt like an escape from the old money gravity. She jumped. She threw herself off the side of the iron platform, plummeting toward the forest floor. She hit the ground hard, the air driven from her lungs. The world went black for a second, and when she opened her eyes, the candles were gone. The mahogany table was gone. The masked guests were gone. She was lying in the mud, gasping, staring up at a rusted, crumbling iron spiral staircase that looked like it had been abandoned for 50 years. It was cold. It was covered in real ivy, and the top platform was rusted through and hanging by a single bolt. Jade scrambled to her feet and ran. She didn't stop until she saw the lights of a ranger vehicle on the main road. When she showed us her hands, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. On both of her palms, there were deep, cauterized burn marks. They weren't random. They were perfect circular imprints of an old iron coin, featuring a coat of arms that hadn't been used by any official government in 200 years. Jade sold her van a week later. She moved to New York City, to the highest floor of a skyscraper she could find. She told me she needs to be surrounded by concrete and steel that was built with a permit, not by blood. But she sent me a message last night. She was at a gala for a tech company, and she saw a man in the corner of the room wearing a tuxedo. He was standing perfectly still, watching her. And when he leaned into the light, she saw that his face didn't move when he smiled. It looked like his skin was made of cured, sun-bleached leather. On Reddit, they call it the elite or shadow people. But in the Great Smokies, we know them as the founders. They don't die. They just wait for their grandchildren to find the stairs, because the mountain never forgets a debt, and eventually, everyone has to take their seat at the table. We've spent this hour talking about the things you can see, the shifting cliffs of Yosemite, the concrete blocks of Rainier, and the iron stairs of the Smokies. But in search and rescue, the most dangerous things are often the ones you only hear. We call it auditory luring. It's a phenomenon where the forest identifies a specific frequency of human distress and plays it back until it finds a fresh target. This final account comes from the Boundary Waters Canoe area in Minnesota, a place of 1,000 lakes and a silence so deep it feels physical. I was part of a recovery team 3 years ago. We were looking for a young girl named Mia who had vanished from a lakeside campsite while her mother was unloading a canoe. It was a clean disappearance. No tracks, no struggle, just a child who was there 1 second and gone the next. On the third night of the search, the wind died down completely. The water of the lake became a black mirror, reflecting a sky full of cold, indifferent stars. That's when the sound started. It didn't sound like a human at first. It was a low, vibrating moan that seemed to come from beneath the water itself. It had a subterranean weight to it, a bass so deep it made the aluminum of our canoes hum. We call it the wail. It's a sound that shouldn't exist in a freshwater lake 1,000 miles from the ocean. But as the sound rose in pitch, it changed. It began to modulate, taking on the jagged, desperate edges of a human sob. Mia's mother, who was staying at the base camp with us, collapsed to her knees. She recognized the sound instantly. It wasn't Mia crying. It was her own voice. It was the exact sound she had made the moment she realized Mia was gone, a raw, guttural wail of total maternal loss. "That's me," she whispered, her face ashy in the firelight. "That's my voice from Tuesday. Why is the lake screaming my grief back at me?" We tried to keep her in the tent, but the wail sound began to move. It drifted across the water, moving toward the center of the lake where the depth drops to 200 feet. And then the voice changed again. From the middle of the dark water, we heard Mia. "Mommy, it's cold. Why are you making that noise? Stop crying and come get me." It was perfect. Every inflection, every childish lisp. Mia's mother broke free from our grip and ran toward the shore. She was convinced her daughter was out there, standing on the water. We had to physically tackle her to keep her from throwing herself into the freezing lake. I put on my headset and directed our high-gain directional mic toward the sound. What I heard through the filters wasn't a child. It was a series of complex mathematical clicks, like a hard drive searching for data, rapidly stitching together phonetic fragments of the mother's earlier screams to build the child's sentence. The forest wasn't just echoing, it was editing. We found Mia's remains the next morning, 3 miles inland in a place she couldn't have reached on foot. She hadn't drowned. She had simply stopped. But the wail didn't stop. To this day, hikers in the Boundary Waters report hearing a woman's wail followed by a child's response, echoing through the mist at 3 a.m. On Reddit, they talk about electronic voice phenomena or residual hauntings. But those of us in SAR know it's simpler and much more predatory. The wilderness is a recording medium. It stores the highest peaks of human emotion, usually our terror and our grief, and it uses them as bait for the next person who wanders too far from the fire. So if you're ever out there and you hear your own voice calling to you from a place you know you haven't been, don't answer, because the forest isn't trying to talk to you. It's just practicing its scales, waiting for you to provide it with a new sound to play. Stay on the trail, keep your children close, and for God's sake, stay quiet, because out here, the silence is the only thing that's actually safe.